Welcome to Liberty Lockdown. Please scan your barcode. Your liberty ain't gone, but yeah, it's on hold. Where did it come from and where did it go? Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Liberty Lockdown. This is Clint Russell, your humble host, and I am joined today by the brother and father of, I'm going to call him an American hero, even though he wasn't born here, Gabriel Shipton and John Shipton. Thank you for joining us.
Pleasure. We could say born again.
Yes, exactly. He is, it's totally bizarre because he's reviled by my government, but deified by my people. And I don't know how you square that circle or balance that equation, but that really does seem to be how it is. The vast majority of the American people I know think that what happened or what Julian did was heroic, and what's happened to him has been horrific. Any thoughts on that?
The United States culture accommodates lots of paradoxes and seems to, from those paradoxes, invent new ways of being. As I grew up in the 70s, I witnessed the unfolding of new ways of being constantly over a period of about 15 years, from the beatniks right through the hippies, the summer of love, and then rock and roll music, and the even relationship between men and women and feminism. So that was a paradox evident after the Second World War, and now we have another paradox which I believe the United States can solve, probably again affecting culture of the West in a profound way.
Gabriel, any thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, I mean, we've come across the same, exactly what you're talking about as we've been traveling around the US, that Julian, is much loved by the American people, but, it draws much ire from the, the sort of institutions, the institutions of state. I think probably, you look back at Julian's work and his the motivation and the motivations behind WikiLeaks and what that meant to people, educating them about what their governments do, what those in power are up to. And that's, I think, why people have an affinity, with Julian and what he stands for, is because he was giving information to normal people like you and I that we could access directly instead of through these gatekeeper organizations or corporate media organizations that were sort of giving us bad information fed to them by the governments. So I think that's why, we and people more generally, really enjoyed Julian's work and enjoyed that philosophy behind Julian's work, that, giving people, educating people, removing people's ignorance so that they could make better decisions about the way their society works. I think people really relate to that, and it's a sort of core tenet of, what the US was built on and what the founding fathers, rightly put in the Constitution, in the First Amendment.
I couldn't agree more, and I can't help but think about the latest corollary to Julian's work in the Twitter leaks, which have once again demonstrated that our own government doesn't believe that we are intelligent enough to have the information to make our own minds up. It's been a trend that has unfortunately worsened as opposed to getting any better, even as we learn more and more about the censorship apparatus and the means of control that they're utilizing. It doesn't seem to be slowing them down. In fact, quite the contrary. It seems that they're speeding up. And I can't help but wonder if their experience with Julian is in fact part of why they are going this path, that you cannot have a free internet and have kind of a cloaked ruling class. And that's really where we're at, it seems like to me. Is this I assume it's a global phenomenon, but Has that been your experience as well? That it seems that there is more and more narrative control and more willingness to overtly censor, journalists.
What seems to be, happening as an observer traveling around the world is an inverse relationship between the moral aura of the institutions of state and their panic to oppress our understanding and consumption of, and drawing upon our communities and ourselves to understand what is unfolding. You have these extraordinary events, one after the other: COVID, Ukraine, the collapse or the moving of the collapse of wars in the Middle East into peace, the arrangements between states to utilize their own currencies in trade. The inverse of that is the enthusiasm which these institutions of state seem to be grabbing onto instruments of oppression. Where it's going to end up is very curious. One of the iconographic elements is in the persecution of Julian Assange. Every single, how can I say this? They're almost sacred. Every single element of what we favor about the United States and the West, its human rights legislation, the First Amendment, the Bill of Rights, the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the Conventions of Asylum, due process, fair court hearings. Every element of that is decaying before our eyes in the pursuit of Julian Assange. It's a great worry. And I think, I feel that the support that Julian's receiving, just last week, we have a series of letters. One in particular I'll mention is that the presidents of Chile, Argentina, Colombia, Brazil, Mexico. Now, these are really important states, have all made known their support of Julian Assange. So, in essence, around the world, other Western elements are joining together to bring attention of the United States administration, the White House administration, that this is going nowhere for them. They're just going backwards on this.
Yeah, well, thank goodness. And just a quick question for you guys. My community, the libertarian community, has been on the front lines demanding his release for as long as I can remember. I don't understand why this has gained steam as of late. Now, granted, I'm thrilled that it is, but I'm just curious is it your guys' efforts? Is it just a matter of time and outrage growing to a boiling point that they're finally willing to listen, or why has it finally seemed to have gotten hold?
Well, I think there are many factors, involved in this. Partly the efforts of everybody who's advocating for Julian around the world. John, myself, and obviously Stella, his wife included. Bringing people together, in every country. And I think once we go and we talk to people about, what's going on here, they usually join our side.
Sure.
They usually can see that what is going on here is absolutely appalling, and how it affects them in their countries. How it's the relationship with the State Department in countries like Germany or France, and how their governments were interfered with, how their economies were interfered with, that's part of the WikiLeaks archive. And so there is a sort of natural affinity with what Julian stands for in all these countries. And I also think since 2019, when the indictment came out, so the 17 Espionage Act charges, and people were actually able to read, physically read the indictment and see what it is. It's using the Espionage Act to criminalize publishing activity, for possessing and publishing this sort of classified material. And so you have now all these organizations in the USA, every sort of press freedom and human rights organization can no longer stand back and say, oh, well, we don't, it's not clear what's going on here. Julian, has asylum in the Ecuadorian embassy. Well, now they have an indictment, and the indictment says that what journalists and publishers do every day is now a criminal offense. And so they can no longer hide behind any of these other excuses. They have to come out in the open and stand against this thing, which is why, recently you saw, I think November last year, all the newspapers that collaborated with Julian on the release of the cables, of the State Department cables, they all wrote a joint letter to the Garland Department of Justice calling for this prosecution, the endless prosecutions against Julian. That's a quote. They called for the endless prosecutions against Julian Assange to come to an end. And so I think it's a combination of all these elements. There's this film Ithaca that we're touring with in the United States. It's been broadcast on the public broadcaster in Australia, over
Great.
Hundreds of thousands of views on that. And, it's all this part of the puzzle. There's many books that have been written. There's music being written. This is a global movement, a global movement for freedom of expression that has formed around the fight to free Julian Assange.
Yeah.
Just if I could add a little bit, not much.
Sure.
From a libertarian perspective, we've found this, that the usual thing in cultivating social movements and politics is money, media, politics. That's the usual cycle. And we've found we don't have any money, so consequently we've taken another course, and we go people and then media and then some cultural change or cultural connection and then politics. We go directly to people all the time, face to face, as much as we can. We use, of course, media as a facilitator of those meetings, but essentially it is the relationship between people that sustains us. And I'd also add that we are catalytic in as much as that I don't think we create the movement that's flourishing. I feel that it is there, but it just needs the catalyst of an event.
Yeah.
Really important.
Yeah. Well, it's it's just I can't even imagine how it's been for you guys, but just for myself, I watched the collateral murder video on, I think it was Facebook, back in like 2008 or 9, and it was so profound. It really, I think in many ways it cemented kind of my anti-government views, and I think that's probably why they went after him. Is like, this is not a narrative that they want out there, that this or anything other than benevolent global hegemons, and in reality it's quite uglier than that. Anyways, I did want to ask you guys a little bit about the just your emotional. I would imagine most interviews have not asked you guys about how you have dealt with this, as opposed to how Julian has dealt with this. And I'm just curious how it has been for both of you to deal with your son and brother being, persecuted on a global scale for over a decade.
Oh, it's pretty ugly. It's dire, and it doesn't get any better for Julian now. It's now 14 years. I mean, it's just shameful and disgraceful. I mean, if you look at the detail each day, you sort of wouldn't get out of bed, because you can find it hard to believe that there's a judiciary existing in the world that can make a decision, an evidential decision. You'd throw up your hands and say, what's the point? but dealing with it as it flows towards us on a basis of faith that there is in the hearts of people a yearning for justice and a revulsion at injustice has sustained us minute to minute, hour to hour, day to day, and year to year.
Wow. Gabriel, same?
Yeah, and I spoke to journalist Chris Hedges, who works with prisoners and their families. He does a lot of teaching in prisons, and one thing he observed about the families of prisoners is that when one of them is in jail, they're all in prison. And so I'd never thought about it like that before. I'd never consider that our situation is anything like that of Julian's, but in a sense that brings us all together, and as a family, we're united in helping Julian to keep fighting to beat this and be free.
Well, I'm rooting for you guys. Now we'll ask the more commonly asked question: how is Julian doing? When's the last time you guys were able to see him, speak to him? His spirits, his health, everything else.
You want to go first, Gabriel?
Yeah. Well, I saw Julian at the end of last year when I was in the UK, and it's a pretty. He's in a pretty delicate position health-wise. His physical health has been deteriorating, for the last however many years. You can imagine that every day that you're locked in a room or in a prison doesn't increase the longevity of your life. It's not a life-giving place. The situation that Julian's in. He had a minor stroke at the end of 2021, and that those complications still exist for him, and that's evidence that this is really taking its toll on his body. When I saw him, we try and make some light conversation in the prison, and try and have a laugh and make him smile or something like that, and that's we try and enjoy our moments together, and that's how the sort of visits with Julian go.
So you are able to see him in person though, periodically?
Yes, yeah. If I'm in the UK, I can go and see him. He gets to see his family, his 2 young sons and Stella. We'll go and visit him in the jail around once a week. So that's that I think, from what I'm told from other situations, it's those moments that really keep people who are inside going, as well as hearing about all the old friends that we meet of Julian's touring around the place, and all the support that is people who are standing with Julian, and that keeps people going when they're fighting in these fights.
Yeah. Well, thank goodness. I can't even imagine only seeing my wife and kids once a week, and having to I can't even imagine how much he must be just counting the hours and minutes down in between those trips or those visits. Just really heartbreaking. Do you guys share my animus towards the media that didn't speak out in unison when obviously a journalist was persecuted to the end of the earth sooner? I mean, like, why didn't they speak out sooner? Or are you guys in kind of whatever accomplishes the task, or let bygones be bygones? Let's move on and let's work together to get him freed. What's your perspective on that?
Yeah, to a certain extent, we have to work with the media, and so we can't rubbish them too much. But
well, feel free to do so on this show.
Yeah, I think
much like the Bill of Rights, if you aren't vigilant, your rights shall be taken away. And they can't be taken away, but you can take them back, and you can take additional responsibility for your life and your finances by signing up for our sponsor, which is CrowdHealth. Health insurance plans can be confusing and expensive. Then when you actually have to use your benefits, there are deductibles, claim processes, and other red tape to deal with. But CrowdHealth puts you back in control of your healthcare and helps you pay for health expenses. CrowdHealth is simple, transparent, and affordable. As a member, you'll get a personal care advocate to help navigate the complexities of health events. Your personal care advocate will even negotiate bills on your behalf. They'll be with you every step of the way and could save you thousands in health bills in the process. You'll get access to a crowd of thousands of other members who are ready to help pay for your large health expenses. Experience healthcare freedom with CrowdHealth. Visit joincrowdhealth.com and use code LOCKDOWN at checkout to get your first 3 months for just $99 per month. That's joincrowdhealth.com, promo code LOCKDOWN. CrowdHealth is not health insurance. It's a totally different way of paying for healthcare. Terms and conditions may apply. And while you're here, make sure you hit that like, comment down below, and hit that subscribe button. Let's get back to the show.
I think, we are often, as John was saying before, you can look at Julian's persecution and you can see the lengths that these powers will go to shut someone up or make an example of Julian for doing this, for publishing this information, or, using these tools of technology to create a new system of information dissemination. So you can look at the media's silence and read that for what it is. It's like another exposure, that they're not coming to Julian's assistance. If they really wanted to, they could publish investigations. They could really look into this and really expose this sort of rotten system that's been created to persecute Julian, but they haven't done that, and I think that's very telling of their position and their closeness to power.
Mm-hmm.
That's what that says to me. I mean, for example, you have an investigation that was done by 3 Yahoo News journalists into the CIA spying and plotting against Julian, and that article is a 6,000-word investigation, citing 30 former current intelligence community sources that said that there were plots to kidnap Julian that went as high as the Trump White House, under Mike Pompeo, emanating from Mike Pompeo when he was director of the CIA. Now, this didn't get any reporting outside of Yahoo. There was no reporting in the New York Times, no reporting in the Washington Post. It's just us and the independent media that are really communicating this to people. And I think that to me is an obvious exposure that these prestige media institutions and their proximity to power is still problematic. But I think the legacy, what we're seeing now is this amazing blooming of independent journalism. Like you look at the Twitter files, right? Like, this is a huge scoop, and it wasn't broken by a prestige media organization. It was broken by these, independent journalists.
Substack army.
Yeah, and now they're getting the views. Now they're getting the subscriptions, and those subscriptions, that's all being taken away from, say, the New York Times or those other outlets. It's not like people will keep their New York Times subscription. They'll cancel it and they'll go over and start reading Substack, or Seymour Hersh. He is now on Substack, breaking these amazing revelations about the Nord Stream pipeline. So I think we're seeing now that news has been broken on these independent platforms. It's no longer exclusive to these prestige media organizations, and that's really, I think, a legacy of WikiLeaks and Julian's work, and really using the internet as a tool of information dissemination.
Yeah, well, ironically, it also proves how important his work was. That you now have only independent journalists that are willing to speak out on behalf of the original independent journalists. Quick question for you guys as to, if there is a primary entity that has been responsible for directing both the chilling of coverage in the media as well as the organizing or orchestrating the kind of the global government response in terms of like the Western governments that have seemed to have been gotten in line when it came to persecuting him. Is it MI6? Is it the British? Is it the Americans? Like, do you guys have any opinion as to, or is it more than that?
Oh, I got a pretty firm opinion on it.
I would imagine.
The UK and the United States are gathered together to, news dissemination in the UK. It has to be controlled. They have a D notice, and if you get a D notice which prohibits you printing certain information, you're not even allowed to say that you've got a D notice, nor what the D notice covers.
Wow, I didn't know that.
They're pretty fierce in their oppression of, and also the outlets, what we call legacy media, which is a polite term. You'd call it something else in private. They deliver themselves to certain sections, but they deliver a sort of approach to government policy, which is in line with government policy, but addresses different sections of a society. So the Guardian is the left, and the Telegraph is the right, and the Daily Mail is in the middle, and so on and so forth. These people, this scurrilous slander that they delivered at Julian's door for year after year after year, have realised, as their ship was sinking, as it's going down and the water's coming over the scuppers, realised that they're in this boat as well as Julian. And so they signed the letter saying, drop the charges. We demand you blokes drop the charges, or you fellas drop the charges over there in the Department of Justice. That ship sinking will take them all down with it. It'll just leave the ferment of independence like yourself and many, many others. It's terrific, as Gabriel just mentioned. In the United States, wherever we go, there's small radio stations blossoming. The Telecommunications Act under Clinton ruined, thousands of newspapers and radio stations in the United States. Equally, the removing of the Glass-Steagall ruined bank after bank, which is the United States had many thousands. Now it has, a few dozen biggies. As a consequence of that, the phenomenon is everybody has moved away and built their own stuff. And it's just wonderful. It's still nascent in my country, in Australia, but it is happening. And the commentators and their commentary are getting firmer, more accurate, and building erudition, deep erudition within their areas of interest. So it's no longer like the New York Times where you can cover areas of interest by just turning a page, in alt media or these platforms like Substack and so on. You do so by attending to different authors, as Taibbi on the manipulation of Twitter, and Cy Hirsch on the investigative journalism of the destruction of North Stream. So you just go from one to the other, and you get actually a deeper and more knowledgeable, more erudite perspective that can fulfill, or will fulfill and does fulfill, an understanding of how you've got to behave in relationship to your local politicians. But more than that, the last sentence, it fulfills a cultural necessity, which informs the politics. Culture comes before politics, not the other way around.
Gabriel, any additional comments, or should I move on?
No, I think, yeah, I'm in agreement with John, on that. And I think you can look back. I always think you look back at these other societies that have, centralized information and these power structures that over time become more and more centralized. Like they're always trying to grab onto things and hold on to them in a centralized fashion. But really, what that leads to is their own failure. They become more and more inefficient,
Yes.
and less able to make changes and less malleable.
Yeah.
And so eventually they sort of collapse in on themselves. And so I think this decentralization of media, the decentralization of money through things like Bitcoin, they're reactions to this centralization of power and information.
Yeah. Well, I mean, perfect example. Like I was a entrepreneur, ran a mortgage company, and now I can do like at least 20% of like a nightly CNN show just as a YouTuber. Like how has this even happened? And I think it's just that there's pure market demand. Like people want to hear someone who's actually in pursuit of truth because they know the news is not doing that anymore. And I think that's why Taibbi and all these others, Greenwald, et cetera, have really exploded in terms of popularity. There's market demand for this stuff, and I've always used the metaphor as like as their fist clenches tighter, more and more of us slip out the sides, and like we become the resistance. And I have to give some credit to Julian on this. I don't think I would have been as inspired to pursue this path as I have been if it weren't for not just his experience, but his efforts and the information that he disclosed. In fact, I'll be debating Destiny in a few weeks on the war in Ukraine and whether or not the U.S. should be supporting them. And one of the, in my opinion, one of the biggest smoking guns as to the fact that the West and specifically the United States State Department knew that this was a red line for the Russians was in fact Julian's release of some of those cables that included the "niet means niet" line.
Yes, Burns.
Yeah.
Yeah, when he was ambassador, he's changed his tune a bit now that he's head of the CIA.
Yes, exactly. When he was still able to tell the truth in private.
Yeah.
But I mean that it's really important that when we're talking about the precipice of World War III, which in my humble opinion, it is a sincere risk right now, and it's not taken seriously enough, unfortunately. But you need real journalists. You're not going to get the truth from governments in these situations, and we're talking about perhaps all of human existence hanging in the balance, and it may hinge on just a little crumb of truth. And I just don't think people really realize that. I mean, it's a profound reality that like just a little bit of truth could actually keep all of humanity alive moving forward. It also could perhaps create some real conflicts moving forward. But it breaks my heart that there isn't unanimity when it comes for demanding our free speech be honored, demanding that independent journalists and free speech or a free press are honored. And I think most symbolically of all of that is to see Julian Assange freed. Has the momentum gained globally, or is this an American phenomenon? What has been your experience as you've done more and more media?
There's a couple of beautiful things in what you say. We have an indigenous singer named Kev Carmody, and he has a song, "Big Things from Little Things Grow." Also, you see the giant oak tree, it grows from an acorn. So what you say, of course, is absolutely correct. The seed or the filament of gold has to be there. The United States, of course, had the great advantage of having the First Amendment and the Bill of Rights, which encompasses the First Amendment encompasses the understanding that something grand can come from something small. I mean, the First Amendment is just one paragraph, and yet in itself, it is grand and emulated around the world. So I concur and recognize the beauty in what you said. As to the question itself, you know, it is growing around the world. I mean, every Western parliament, with the exception of Sweden, and even Sweden used to have Assange supporters in its parliament, some of them have a third of the parliament, like Greece, or the Australians have 25%. So, and so on around the world. I mean, there's no parliament that's not concerned. Now, parliamentarians rest upon, or let's say, are uplifted by people. That is, their understanding reflects a mass understanding of within the people, the populations. That's really clear to us. And Gabriel can tell you about the letters that are circulating around the world.
Yes, please.
Yeah, well, there's some letters that were due to come out tomorrow of parliamentarians from the UK, the US, Australia, all calling on the Garland Department of Justice to drop this. And they're letters from parliamentarians or, you know, Congress people, legislators in all those countries who are from all parties. It's not they're not just Labor or Liberal or Republican or Democrat in their own countries. It's a cross section of the political spectrum who are all signing on to these letters. So that's I think a really interesting part of this phenomena is that it's it's not a left or right issue. It's not a partisan issue. People understand, or these politicians who are sort of fed from their voters, they understand that this is, a basic democratic right. It's a basic building block of democracy that is at stake. And so that's why we see, for instance, in the Congress, this Espionage Act reform bill that was sponsored by Thomas Massey, as well as Ro Khanna. So you see these types of people being able to come together on these issues. You have Marjorie Taylor Greene as well as Rashida Tlaib,
right.
and so when you have these sorts of weird, or not weird, but strange bedfellows in coalition, I think that's very, very rare for an issue, but very, very shows the importance of the issue.
Yeah, shows that people are finally opening their fucking eyes and realizing how important this is.
Get with the program.
Yeah, man. It's forgive me. I'm so frustrated by this, and I've only been a journalist, if this is even what I am, for a few years now, and even I can feel the temperature rising, that like they can come for all of us. The fact that like it's not just individual, like now there are so many of us because of the advent of the internet and all these other platforms that allow us to report independently. But you look at the Twitter leaks and you're just like, wow, like they are willing to dictate terms of service to basically every giant social media platform. Like, these people are not interested in my rights. They're not interested in free speech. They're not interested in a free press. They're not interested in journalism at all. They would greatly prefer to have us be, the CCP, where you have all media state controlled and operated, and it's horrifying that it's taken so long for these assholes to realize how dangerous this is. And like, do you want to live in a world where journalists are persecuted? Do you want that? And they don't seem to take it with the level of seriousness that this obviously demands. And I'm so fucking pissed off. I can't even like put it into words how upsetting this is. Anyways, I wanted to ask you guys a little bit about what Julian was like as a child. Has he always been kind of this an intransigent figure that was in pursuit of truth, or what was he? How did this transition into this industry happen?
Well, his mum used to call him Wizard. It was shortened to Wizzy, who's pretty precocious and curious. Yeah. And also disciplined in his particular academic concerns. Yeah, that precocious and how did he say? A compelling curiosity was his words to describe
it. Compelling curiosity in terms of himself, or in terms of his. Like
no,
his
he just his curiosity was deep and compelling, so it drove him a lot. Yeah.
Interesting. Well, I feel like
I sort of agree with you in the like. You're expressing the frustration at the growing tyranny in the Western nations, particularly after COVID, which was sort of like a nightmare of tyrannous laws everywhere, lockdowns, for God's sake. But I always revert, so that we're no longer naive. That Julian has now been 14 years banged up and had 10 years of ceaseless, scurrilous slander, the most scurrilous slander. So it illustrates to you over and over again that if we don't organise and have some unity about our capacities and our freedoms, if you like to use that word, they're ours. And in the case of the United States, its Constitution, particularly the Bill of Rights 1 to 10, numero uno being the First Amendment, they belong to the people of the United States, not the government. Not the government. And everybody who enters service in the United States, wherever, swears allegiance to the Constitution. So that's the bounden duty of a citizen is to, one way or another, gently, persistently, firmly, adamantine, diamond-like hardness, insist that those who take the oath of allegiance take it very seriously.
Beautifully said. And keeping in mind too that document does not give me those rights. I have those rights.
Yes.
They can't take them away. And man, it's heartening to see you guys, taking so much time out of your lives to continue in this fight and to spread the word. And I really hope that there's a break in the dam, if you will. Gabriel, is this the documentary? Is there any beyond that? Is there anything else that my audience can do to support in this cause?
Yeah, well, we're encouraging everyone to contact their Congress people. There's a letter circulating, or just contact them and let them know that this is an area of concern for you, and what are they going to do about it? Because at the end of the day, we delegate our power to them, so we have to sort of let them know what we want, or let them know what's on our minds and what we care about.
Let them know that we'll replace them if they don't listen. Yeah,
that's right. Yeah, that's right. They love votes too, apparently.
Oh,
Well,
I love those both.
is the documentary out already?
Yeah. So we're touring the US at the moment.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
Yeah. So you can log on to the website ithaca.movie. That's ITHAKA.movie, and that has all our schedule on there. We also encourage people to host a screening if they'd like to, so they can pop all their information into a form there, and you'll get a response if you'd like to host your own screening somewhere of the film.
Well, I didn't ever connect the dots, but the "niet means niet" line was that essentially Ukraine was the reddest of red line, not just for Russian leadership, but for the Russian people when it came to being added to NATO, and that continuing in that path would likely escalate us towards World War III. And it was once again, Julian Assange's disclosures that allow us to know that our State Department was not caught off guard, that in fact they knew they knew full well that this pathway was leading towards a hot conflict and now a proxy war between the West and Russia. I just want to say, for someone at the time, I was in my, I think, mid-20s when I first saw any of the WikiLeaks disclosures. It in many ways changed my life, and it made me feel as if there was ever an opportunity for me to contribute to the cause in any way, I would. I named my show Liberty Lockdown. You can already tell my political leanings, and your son, brother, Julian, inspired me tremendously. So, and you guys continue to inspire me now that you're standing alongside him, and I really hope that we see him freed here soon, and I hope that the people that have persecuted him unjustifiably pay a huge price for it. Thank you guys so much for your time, and if there's anything else you'd like to leave with my audience, please feel free. We'll start with John.
I want to thank the people of the United States for their warmth and hospitality. They, together we'll get something done. There's no doubt about it.
I agree. Gabriel?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with John. And just thank you for having us on the program, Clint. And yeah, check out the website for where we'll be next around the States, ithaca.movie.
Love it. I will link to that in the description below. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. If you would like to support my work, go to libertylockdown.locals.com. We are out.
Welcome to Liberty Lockdown. Please scan your barcode. Your liberty ain't gone, but yeah, it's on hold. Where did it come from and where did it go?